Ilara Vance believed her life was over. It had ended 1,000 miles back, in a plume of smoke and a field of ashes that had once been her home. All she had left of her husband was a memory, and a small, heavy chest filled with a secret fortune he had painstakingly saved, a fortune that now felt more like a curse than a blessing. It was dead weight, just like the hope in her heart. She arrived in the town of Ash Creek on a tired horse, her gaze sweeping over a landscape that mirrored her own soul, burnt, broken, and desolate. The town was a collection of charred skeletons where buildings once stood, a grim monument to a fire that had consumed everything but the dirt and the despair. The air itself tasted of soot and defeat. Yet, amidst the ruins, life clung on stubbornly. A few dozen settlers, their faces etched with hardship, moved like ghosts through the skeletal remains of their main street. It was here, in this crucible of misery, that Ilara witnessed an act of cruelty so casual it froze the blood in her veins. A man, broad and imposing in a fine coat that was grotesquely out of place, stood before a small, ramshackle cabin. This was Silas Blackwood, a name she'd heard whispered with fear on the trail into town. He owned the debt, the land, the very air the people breathed. His face, a mask of smug authority, was turned towards his victim, a man with an empty sleeve pinned to his shirt, his shoulders slumped not just from the missing limb, but from the crushing weight of public humiliation. This was Jedediah, the one-armed cowboy, the town outcast. "The debt is due, Jedediah," Blackwood's voice boomed, dripping with false pity. "You have nothing. This plot, this pathetic little hovel, is now mine." Jedediah said nothing. His jaw was tight, his one good hand clenched into a fist at his side. He stared at a single, defiant patch of green near his doorway, a small garden, inexplicably lush amidst the surrounding devastation. It was the only vibrant thing in the entire town. Blackwood chuckled, a low, cruel sound. "I'll have my men clear this eyesore by sundown. You can find a ditch to sleep in." The townsfolk watched, silent and powerless. Their inaction was a wall Ilara had seen before, a wall she understood. But something inside her, an ember she thought long extinguished, flickered. She saw in Jedediah's quiet defiance the same stubborn refusal to completely break that had carried her across the plains. Before she even knew what she was doing, her voice, clear and steady, cut through the tense silence. "He will not be leaving." Blackwood turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of the newcomer, a woman, alone, dust-covered but with a spine of steel. He smirked. "And who are you to say?" Ilara dismounted, walking forward until she stood between the tyrant and his prey. She looked at Jedediah's shocked face, then back at Blackwood. "I will pay his debt," she declared. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Blackwood's smirk widened into a predatory grin. "With what, little lady?" "Your pretty words." It was a gamble, a desperate, insane leap into a future she hadn't planned. "I will pay his debt," she repeated, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. "And I will marry him." The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than any sound. Jedediah stared at her as if she were an apparition. Blackwood's eyes glinted with a dark, calculating amusement. A broken widow and a crippled farmer. It was a joke. But he saw the fire in her eyes, and a different kind of opportunity. He would own the man's land through the woman. "Fine," Blackwood spat, the words sealing their fates. "The wedding will be tomorrow. I'll expect my money then." He turned and strode away, leaving Ilara standing beside a man she did not know, in a town that had already died once, having just bound her life to both. The ceremony was a bleak affair, officiated by a nervous clerk who mumbled the words as if he feared Blackwood might hear them. Ilara and Jedediah stood side by side in the shell of the old church, two strangers tethered by a desperate act. She wore her simple traveling dress, he wore his cleanest shirt. When the clerk pronounced them man and wife, they did not touch. They simply turned and walked back to his small cabin, the gazes of the few silent townspeople following them like accusations. The cabin was sparse but clean. A simple cot, a rough-hewn table, and a small stone hearth. The air inside was thick with the unspoken questions that hung between them. "What have you done? Who are you?" For days, they moved around each other in a careful, silent dance of avoidance. Ilara would wake early, tending to the small fire, her thoughts a whirlwind of grief for her past and terror for her future. Jedediah would busy himself outside, his one arm working with a practiced, surprising efficiency as he tended his small, miraculous garden. He never asked about the money she had used to pay Blackwood, a sum that had made the tyrant's eyes flash with greed. He never asked why she had done it. He seemed to accept it as just another strange cruelty in a life defined by them. One afternoon, the shadow of Silas Blackwood fell across their doorway. He didn't knock. He simply entered, his bulk filling the small space, his cologne a sickening perfume of power. Well, well, he purred, his eyes sliding over Ilara, ignoring Jedediah completely. The happy couple. I'm making plans for Ash Creek, you know. Big plans. This entire valley will be my ranch. A new town, built in my name. His gaze lingered on Ilara. There will be a fine manor house on the hill. A house fit for a queen. The threat was clear, hanging in the air like smoke. He believed he had bought her along with the debt. Jedediah stiffened, his body a rigid line of fury, but he remained silent, knowing any move he made would be futile. But Blackwood had misjudged his opponent. Ilara met his gaze, her expression not of fear, but of ice. "This is our home, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "You are not welcome here." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your home? This is my town. Everything in it is mine. Including the things I allow others to borrow." He left as abruptly as he arrived, but the chill of his presence remained. That night, something shifted. Ilara, fueled by a cold rage, unpacked the last of her belongings. From the heavy chest, she pulled not just coins, but ledgers, maps, and plans. Her husband had not just been a farmer, he had been an engineer, a dreamer. And he had taught her everything. The next morning, a wagon arrived, laden with supplies Ilara had secretly ordered from a city 3 days away. Lumber, tools, bags of seed, panes of glass. Jedediah watched from the doorway, his face a canvas of disbelief as she directed the unloading with quiet authority. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his directly for the first time. "We are going to rebuild," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. For the first time in a year, Jedediah felt a stirring in the barren soil of his heart. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling, but he recognized it. It was hope. He picked up a hammer, his grip sure and strong, and for the first time, he spoke to his wife. "Show me where to begin." The work became their language. In the shared rhythm of hammering nails and tilling earth, the wall of silence between them began to crumble. Ilara discovered Jedediah's quiet strength, the way he had adapted to his injury with a stubborn ingenuity that bordered on genius. He, in turn, saw past her grief to the fierce intelligence and unbendable will beneath. Their small plot of land began to transform. A new fence, straight and strong, replaced the dilapidated one. A small but sturdy extension was added to the cabin, with a real glass window that caught the morning sun. The garden, nourished by new soil and careful hands, expanded, becoming a vibrant tapestry of green against the black, charred landscape. Their farm became an island of life in a sea of decay, and the other settlers took notice. A quiet admiration began to replace their fearful pity. But hope is a dangerous thing in a town ruled by a tyrant. One evening, as dusk settled over the valley, a figure emerged from the shadows of the ruined town. It was Finn, Blackwood's foreman, a man with a perpetually haunted look in his eyes. He approached their fence hesitantly, his hat clutched in his hands. He whispered, his voice ragged. I have to tell you something." Ilara and Jedediah met him at the fence line, their guards immediately up. Finn's eyes darted around nervously. "The fire, the one that took the town, it weren't no accident." The words hung in the cold air. "Blackwood," Jedediah stated, his voice flat and hard. Finn nodded, shamefaced. "He wanted the deeds. Burned everyone out so he could buy their land for nothing. He got all of them, except 1 inch." He looked directly at Jedediah. "Yours. Your family was granted this plot by the first governor of the territory. The deed is ironclad. He can't buy it. He can't seize it. He has to drive you off it suddenly. Everything made sense. The relentless harassment, the crushing debt, Blackwood's obsession with this one small patch of land. Finn continued, his voice barely audible. He's planning something big. A railroad spur. And the survey maps show it has to come right through here. Your land is the key to his entire fortune. Armed with this terrible truth, Ilara's resolve hardened into something sharper, more dangerous. Their fight was no longer just for a home, it was for justice. But as their small farm flourished, so did Blackwood's rage. His campaign of intimidation escalated. One morning they awoke to find their well fouled with oil. Another day, a section of their new fence was torn down, their young crops trampled. Each act of sabotage was met with quiet, relentless rebuilding. They dug a new well. They mended the fence. They replanted the crops. If you're finding inspiration in their courage, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. The tension culminated in a direct confrontation. Blackwood rode up to their farm, his face a thundercloud of fury. He dismounted and stormed towards Ilara, who stood her ground near the porch. "I am done with these games," he snarled, his voice low and menacing. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like talons. "You listen to me. You belong to me now. This land will be mine. I will tear down this cabin, and I will put your husband in the ground beneath it." Jedediah launched himself from the porch, his one arm hooking around Blackwood's neck, pulling him away from Ilara. The two men crashed to the ground. Blackwood's thugs, watching from their horses, drew their guns. But Ilara did not scream. Her fear had been burned away, replaced by a glacial calm. She stood over the two struggling men, her eyes locked on Blackwood. "You will not have this land," she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. "And you will not have me." Blackwood, tasting defeat and public humiliation, decided to end the rebellion once and for all. He gathered his men, a dozen armed riders united by greed and fear, and thundered towards the small farm as the sun began to set. They were no longer intimidators, they were an invading army. They surrounded the small cabin, their horses kicking up dust, their faces grim. From within, Ilara and Jedediah watched, their new window now a viewport into their own demise. Jedediah held an old rifle, his single hand steady. Ilara held a small pistol her husband had insisted she learn to use. It was a hopeless situation. A woman and a one-armed man against a dozen hired guns. "This is your last chance," Blackwood bellowed, his voice echoing across the silent valley. "Come out now, or we burn you out." The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. What would you do in that situation? Would you surrender, or would you make a final stand for your home? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Jedediah looked at Ilara, his eyes filled with a love that had grown silently in the soil of their shared struggle. "I'm glad you came to Ash Creek," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm glad you married me." Before she could answer, Blackwood gave the order. "Burn it." His men moved forward with torches. But just as the first torch was about to be thrown, a single gunshot cracked through the evening air. It didn't come from the cabin. It came from the ruins of the town. Blackwood and his men froze, turning towards the sound. From the charred skeletons of the blacksmith shop and the general store, figures began to emerge. It was Finn, the foreman, holding a smoking rifle. And behind him stood the ghosts of Ash Creek, the shopkeeper, the blacksmith, the farmers, the families. They were armed with whatever they could find, old hunting rifles, pitchforks, axes, and a courage they had thought long dead. They formed a silent, determined line between Blackwood's gang and the small farm. They had chosen a side. Blackwood stared in disbelief, his face contorting with rage. "Traitors! You work for me," he screamed. Finn stepped forward, his face no longer haunted by fear but illuminated by resolve. "We work for ourselves," he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the valley. "And we know what you did, Silas. We know you set the fire." He held up a thick leather-bound book. "I have your ledger. Every bribe, every threat, every crime. It's all in here. The revelation struck Blackwood's men like a physical blow. They looked from the ledger to their neighbors, then back to the tyrant whose lies had held them captive. Their loyalty, built on fear and money, crumbled into dust. Blackwood, seeing his empire dissolving before his eyes, was consumed by a primal fury. He was a cornered animal, and he did what cornered animals do. He drew his pistol, his eyes wild, and aimed it directly at the source of his ruin, Ilara. But in that split second, Jedediah moved with a speed born of pure love and protective instinct. He threw himself in front of her, a human shield. He didn't try to block the bullet. He charged, his one powerful arm outstretched, and tackled Blackwood with the force of a battering ram. The gun went off, the shot going wild into the sky as the two men crashed to the earth in a tangle of limbs. The final, desperate struggle was not one of strength against strength, but of desperation against righteousness. Jedediah, fueled by everything he had almost lost and everything he had just found, fought with the power of a man reborn. He wrenched the gun from Blackwood's hand, his grip like iron, and subdued the sputtering, defeated tyrant on the very land he had tried so desperately to steal. The standoff dissolved as quickly as it had begun. The arrival of a lone rider, a territorial marshal summoned by a message Finn had sent days earlier, was merely a formality. Blackwood's own ledger became his indictment, each entry a nail in the coffin of his reign. His men, offered leniency in exchange for their testimony, laid down their arms without a fight. Silas Blackwood, the man who had sought to be a king, was bound in chains and led away, his threats and curses echoing impotently as he disappeared from the town he had tried to both destroy and create in his own image. His power, built on a foundation of fear, had vanished like smoke in the wind. The silence he left behind was not one of despair, but of profound, cleansing peace. With Blackwood gone and the truth revealed, the spirit of the town was rekindled. The change began slowly, then all at once. Guided by Ilara's vision and funded by the fortune she no longer saw as a curse but as a tool for creation, the settlers began to rebuild. They did not resurrect Ash Creek. A town born of ash deserved a new name. They called it Phoenix. The name was whispered at first, then spoken with pride. It was a promise, a declaration that they, too, had risen from the fire, stronger and more united than before. New lumber, paid for by Ilara's fortune, arrived by the wagon load. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the mournful whisper of the wind through charred timbers. A new general store, a new blacksmith, new homes rose from the scorched earth. And at the heart of it all was the small farm, now a flourishing oasis that served as the town's inspiration. Ilara and Jedediah, the unlikely couple forged in a crucible of violence and despair, were the town's undisputed heart. Their marriage, once a desperate bargain, had deepened into a partnership of unwavering trust and profound love. They led not with authority, but with action, working side by side with their neighbors to build a future for them all. The epilogue of their story was not written in ledgers or deeds, but in quiet moments of shared peace. Months later, they stood on the porch of their expanded home, looking out over a valley that was no longer black and gray, but green and gold with new life. The town of Phoenix bustled below, a testament to what could be built when courage stood up to greed. Jedediah's hand, his one good hand, found Ilara's and held it tight. No words were needed. The future they had won was reflected in each other's eyes. Their story proves that even in the most broken places, from the ashes of the deepest despair, hope can be reborn. It teaches us that true strength is not the power to dominate, but the courage to protect, and that the love between two people can be enough to rebuild a world. The legend of Phoenix and its founders was just beginning, a story that would be told for generations. For more stories that celebrate the triumph of the human spirit over darkness, click on the video you see on your screen now.